Linda Chen glanced at the clock mounted on the wall behind the teller counter at the Wells Fargo branch on Irving Street in San Francisco's Sunset District. The digital display showed 2:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon in mid-November. Outside the large plate glass windows, fog was beginning to roll in from the Pacific Ocean, casting the neighborhood in that distinctive gray light that was so characteristically San Francisco. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was calm but purposeful, with about a dozen customers scattered throughout the lobby, some waiting in line for teller service, others using the ATM machines or meeting with personal bankers in the glass-walled offices along the far wall. At 44 years old, Linda Chen had worked at this particular Wells Fargo branch for 16 years, essentially her entire adult professional life since graduating from San Francisco State University with a degree in business administration. She'd started as a part-time teller while finishing college, been hired full-time immediately after graduation, and had steadily worked her way up to senior teller and then to lead teller, a position that came with supervisory responsibilities over the other tellers and the authority to handle complex transactions and customer issues. 16 years was a long time to work at one branch, long enough that Linda had become a fixture in the neighborhood. She knew most of the regular customers by name, knew their usual banking patterns, remembered significant life events they'd shared with her over the years. She'd watched customers' children grow from infants brought in by new parents, to teenagers opening their first checking accounts, to young adults getting their first mortgages. She'd celebrated with customers when they made large deposits from business successes or inheritances, and she'd sympathized during difficult times when customers needed to withdraw funds for emergencies or hardships. This longevity and familiarity with customers made Linda particularly good at her job. She could process transactions efficiently while still maintaining the personal connection that made banking feel less impersonal and more community-oriented. But this deep knowledge of her customers also meant Linda noticed when something seemed wrong, when a customer's behavior changed in ways that didn't make sense, when financial patterns shifted in concerning directions. The electronic chime at Linda's teller window signaled that another customer was approaching her station. She looked up from the transaction she'd just completed and felt her professional smile broaden with genuine warmth as she recognized the elderly man walking slowly toward her window. "Good afternoon, Mr. Kim," Linda said cheerfully, her voice carrying the kind of friendly familiarity that came from years of regular interaction. "How are you doing today? How's everything going?" Harold Kim was 82 years old, a Korean-American man who'd immigrated to San Francisco in 1967 at the age of 25, part of the wave of Korean immigration that had followed changes to U.S. immigration law in 1965. He'd arrived in America with a newly minted engineering degree from Seoul National University, barely any English skills, and tremendous determination to build a better life. Over the decades, Harold had achieved that American dream through hard work and careful financial planning. He'd secured a good engineering position at one of the Bay Area's technology companies, eventually becoming a senior engineer with a comfortable salary. He'd married another Korean immigrant, a woman named Soon-ja, who worked as a nurse. Together, they'd purchased this modest home in the Sunset District in 1975, raised no children but lived contentedly together for nearly 50 years, saved diligently, and enjoyed a comfortable retirement. Harold had been banking at this Wells Fargo branch for over 40 years, since before Linda was even born. He was the kind of customer banks loved: stable, responsible, never overdrawn, always polite and patient, even when transactions took time. Linda had known Harold for her entire 16 years at the branch, though of course he'd been a customer long before she arrived. For all those years, Harold had been sharp, meticulous about his finances, always dressed impeccably in button-down shirts and pressed slacks, even though he'd been retired for over 15 years. He was formal in the way of his generation and cultural background, always addressing Linda as Miss Chen, despite her repeated invitations to call her by her first name, always thanking her graciously for her service, always reviewing transaction receipts carefully before tucking them into a worn leather wallet he'd carried for decades. But as Linda looked at Harold approaching her window on this particular Friday afternoon, she couldn't help but notice how much he'd changed over the past year, and especially over the past few months. He looked older somehow, more fragile, less steady on his feet. His clothing, while still neat, wasn't pressed as crisply as it used to be. His eyes, which had always been alert and focused, now had a slightly confused, uncertain quality. And his demeanor, once confident and self-assured, now seemed anxious and almost fearful. Harold reached Linda's window and gave her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hello, Linda," he said, his English still carrying a noticeable Korean accent, even after nearly 60 years in America. "I need to make a withdrawal today, please." "Of course, Mr. Kim," Linda replied, her professional demeanor masking the concern that was building in her chest. "How much would you like to withdraw?" "I need $8,000, Harold said, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. "In cash, please. $100 bills would be best." Linda's fingers paused over her keyboard. $8,000, in cash, for the 13th consecutive Friday. She'd been tracking this pattern mentally for the past 3 months, growing increasingly concerned with each passing week. Every single Friday afternoon, like clockwork, Harold Kim came into the bank and withdrew exactly $8,000 in cash, not $7,500, not $8,500, exactly $8,000, every single week, without fail. Linda had worked in banking long enough to know that this kind of pattern was a massive red flag. Elderly customers who suddenly started withdrawing large amounts of cash regularly were often victims of financial exploitation or scams. It was one of the most common warning signs that bank employees were trained to recognize and report. "Mr. Kim," Linda said gently, trying to keep her voice casual and non-threatening, "that's quite a significant amount of cash to be carrying around. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer a cashier's check instead? Or we could arrange to have payment sent directly from your account to wherever this money needs to go. It would be much safer than carrying that much cash through the city." Harold shook his head quickly, almost nervously. No, it must be cash," he said, and Linda detected a note of anxiety, almost fear in his voice. "Crystal needs it in cash. She says it's easier to manage the household expenses that way. Cash is simpler for her." "Crystal?" Linda asked carefully, trying to keep her tone neutral and curious rather than interrogative. "Is Crystal a family member who helps you with your finances?" "Crystal is my caregiver," Harold explained, and there was something in the way he said it that sounded rehearsed, as if he was repeating words someone had told him to say. "She helps me with everything now. Shopping, cooking, cleaning, managing the bills, taking me to doctor appointments. After Sunija passed away, after my wife died, I needed help. Crystal takes care of everything. She handles all the household expenses and my care needs. She says it's easier if I give her cash so she can pay for things directly without having to keep asking me for money." Linda's concern deepened as she processed this information. Harold's wife had died about 13 months ago. Linda remembered because Harold had come into the bank shortly after Sunija's death to remove her name from their joint accounts and update his beneficiary information. He'd been devastated, barely able to speak through his grief. Losing a spouse after 50 years of marriage was traumatic at any age, but for an elderly person, it often triggered rapid decline, cognitive, physical, emotional, and social. It made sense that Harold had needed help after Sunija's death. What didn't make sense was the amount of money he was giving this caregiver and the way it was being handled. "Mr. Kim, I completely understand needing help, especially after losing your wife," Linda said with genuine sympathy. "But $8,000 every week seems like an awful lot for household expenses and care services. Do you have a written agreement with Crystal spelling out her wages and reimbursement for expenses? Do you get receipts showing what the money is being spent on?" Harold looked uncomfortable, even a bit confused by the questions. I trust Crystal. She takes care of everything. I don't really understand all the details anymore. My mind, it's not as sharp as it used to be. Crystal says I forget things, that I get confused about finances. She says it's better if she handles everything so I don't have to worry. She knows what needs to be paid." This was exactly the kind of explanation that rang alarm bells for financial exploitation. An elderly person with cognitive decline, isolated after losing a spouse, trusting a caregiver completely, unable to account for where large amounts of money were going. It fit the pattern perfectly. But Linda also knew she had to be careful. She couldn't refuse to process a legitimate withdrawal from a customer's own account just because she had concerns. If Harold wanted to withdraw his money, that was technically his right as the account holder. Linda didn't have clear evidence of coercion or incompetence that would legally justify refusing the transaction. What she could do was process the withdrawal while documenting her concerns and reporting them through the proper channels. "All right, Mr. Kim, I'll get that withdrawal processed for you," Linda said, maintaining her professional, friendly demeanor while her mind was already planning her next steps. "It'll take me just a few minutes to count out that amount of cash. Would you like to have a seat in the waiting area? I'll call you back when it's ready." No, I'll wait here," Harold said quickly. "Crystal is waiting outside. She doesn't like it when I take too long." That statement sent another chill down Linda's spine. The caregiver was waiting outside and became impatient when Harold took too long. Why wasn't the caregiver coming into the bank with Harold? Why was she waiting outside, presumably to intercept the cash immediately? Linda processed the withdrawal, going to the vault to retrieve $8,100 bills, carefully counting them twice to ensure accuracy. She placed the cash in a bank envelope, then counted it out once more in front of Harold as she handed it to him, having him sign the withdrawal slip documenting the transaction. As Harold took the thick envelope of cash, Linda made one more attempt. "Mr. Kim, I'm here at the bank every weekday if you ever need to talk about your accounts or review your financial situation. I'd be happy to sit down with you in one of our private consultation rooms and go over everything, make sure all your bills are being paid properly, make sure you understand where your money is going. Would you like to schedule a time to do that?" Harold shook his head, that anxious, almost fearful expression crossing his face again. "No thank you, Linda. That's not necessary. Crystal handles everything. She would be upset if she thought I didn't trust her. I need to go now. She's waiting." Harold clutched the envelope of cash tightly and turned away from the teller window, moving as quickly as his elderly legs would carry him toward the bank's exit. Linda watched through the large plate glass windows as Harold emerged onto Irving Street and walked directly to a silver BMW that was parked in a loading zone, right in front of the bank entrance. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, stood leaning against the BMW, smoking a cigarette and scrolling through her phone with the kind of impatient body language that suggested she'd been waiting and wasn't happy about it. She was attractive in a calculated way. Long dark hair, tight jeans, fashionable top, expensive sunglasses pushed up on her head despite the foggy weather. She didn't look like a professional caregiver. She looked like someone who spent a lot of money on her appearance and enjoyed a lifestyle well beyond what a home health aide could typically afford. As Harold approached, the woman, presumably Crystal, barely looked up from her phone. She didn't greet Harold with any warmth or ask how he was feeling. She didn't offer to help him, didn't open the car door for him, didn't show any of the attentiveness or concern that a legitimate caregiver would demonstrate toward an elderly client. Instead, Crystal simply held out her hand expectantly. Harold handed her the bank envelope. Crystal immediately opened it, right there on the street, and quickly riffled through the stack of $100 bills, clearly counting to verify that the full $8,000 was there. Satisfied, she tucked the envelope into her large designer handbag, dropped her cigarette on the sidewalk and ground it out with her shoe, then finally looked at Harold and said something Linda couldn't hear through the window. Whatever Crystal said, Harold's shoulders slumped even further. He looked like a child being scolded by a parent. Crystal gestured impatiently toward the passenger side of the BMW. Harold walked around the car and got into the passenger seat. Crystal got into the driver's seat, and within seconds the BMW pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the Friday afternoon traffic heading west toward the Pacific Ocean. Linda stood at her teller window, staring after the departed BMW, her stomach churning with concern and anger. Everything about that interaction screamed financial exploitation. The impatient caregiver who didn't actually provide any care, the immediate confiscation of the cash with no discussion or accounting, the scolding demeanor, the expensive car and designer accessories that a home health aide making modest wages couldn't afford, the elderly man looking frightened and diminished. Something was very, very wrong with Harold Kim's situation, and Linda knew she had to do something about it. She glanced at the clock. It was now 3:15 p.m. Her shift ended at 5 p.m., but this couldn't wait. Linda caught the attention of her colleague at the next teller window, a newer employee named Jennifer Lopez who'd been working at the branch for about 2 years. "Jennifer, can you handle my station for a few minutes? I need to speak with Mr. Martinez urgently about a customer concern." "Sure, no problem," Jennifer said, already moving to cover Linda's window. Linda walked quickly through the lobby toward the branch manager's office. Robert Martinez had been the branch manager for 5 years, having transferred from another San Francisco Wells Fargo branch. He was a good manager, supportive of his staff, knowledgeable about banking regulations, and particularly attentive to issues involving elder financial abuse, which had become a major focus for Wells Fargo and the entire banking industry in recent years. Linda knocked on the open door of Robert's office. He was on the phone but gestured for her to come in and sit down. She waited while he wrapped up his call, her mind organizing how to present her concerns about Harold. "Linda, what's going on?" Robert asked as he hung up the phone. "You look worried." "I am worried, very worried. It's about one of our long-time customers, Harold Kim. He's 82 years old, been banking with us for over 40 years, and I believe he's being financially exploited by someone claiming to be his caregiver." Robert's expression immediately became serious. "Tell me everything." Linda took a deep breath and laid out her concerns. "Mr. Kim has been coming in every Friday for the past 13 weeks, 3 full months, and withdrawing exactly $8,000 in cash. every single week, like clockwork. That's approximately $104,000 in just 3 months. I've been tracking it mentally, and today I finally looked at his full account history. Mr. Martinez, Harold's financial situation has completely deteriorated over the past year. Walk me through what you're seeing, Robert said, already pulling up Harold's accounts on his computer. Linda leaned forward. Harold receives about $8,000 per month in income, $3,000 from Social Security and $5,000 from his pension. He paid off his house decades ago, so his major expenses are just property taxes, utilities, insurance, food, medical costs. For all the years I've known him, he was financially stable, always had money left over that he saved. His savings account had over $200,000 in it as of a year ago. And now, Robert asked, scrolling through the account activity on his screen, now his savings are down to $37,000. He's lost over $160,000 in saved money in just 12 months. And it's not because he's spending it on himself. His mortgage is late, his utility bills have gone unpaid, he has medical bills going to collections. Meanwhile, he's withdrawing $8,000 in cash every single week and giving it to this woman named Crystal who claims to be his caregiver. Robert's frown deepened as he reviewed the account history. This is a textbook elder financial abuse pattern. Sudden large withdrawals, deteriorating bill payment, significant depletion of savings. Do you know anything about this caregiver? Only what Harold told me today. Her name is Crystal. She supposedly helps him with daily activities and manages his household expenses. Harold said she needs cash to pay for things. But Robert, I watched their interaction through the window after Harold left the bank. This woman doesn't act like a caregiver. She was waiting in a silver BMW expensive car. She's dressed in designer clothes. She didn't help Harold in any way, didn't show any concern for him. She just took the money from him, counted it immediately to verify the amount. Then they drove off. Did you get any other identifying information about her? Last name, license plate, anything? No, just the first name Crystal and the description of the car and her appearance. But Mr. Martinez, Harold has changed so much over the past year. He seems confused now, uncertain. He used to be so sharp. He told me his mind isn't as clear as it used to be, that Crystal tells him he forgets things and shouldn't worry about finances. That's exactly how exploitation works. The abuser convinces the victim they're incompetent and need to rely completely on the abuser. Robert nodded grimly. Wells Fargo has strict protocols for situations like this. We need to file a suspicious activity report with FinCEN immediately. That's required by federal law when we suspect elder financial abuse. We also need to report to California Adult Protective Services, and I'm going to recommend we place a temporary hold on large cash withdrawals from Harold's accounts pending investigation. California law gives us authority to delay or refuse transactions for up to 30 days when we have reasonable suspicion that a vulnerable adult is being financially exploited. Won't Harold be upset if he comes in next Friday, and we won't give him the money? Linda asked. He might be, or more likely Crystal will be upset and will pressure Harold to be upset. But our primary obligation is to protect our customer. If Harold is being financially exploited, preventing further withdrawals could save what's left of his life savings. We'll explain that we're concerned for his financial security, and that we need to verify transactions are being made freely, without coercion or undue influence. Robert pulled up the suspicious activity report form on his computer. I'm going to need detailed information from you, dates and amounts of all the withdrawals you've noticed, descriptions of the interactions you've observed, everything Harold has told you about this Crystal person. For the next 45 minutes, Linda provided comprehensive information while Robert documented everything in the SAR. They noted the pattern of 13 consecutive Friday withdrawals of exactly $8,000 each, totaling $104,000. They documented Harold's statement that Crystal was his caregiver who needed cash for household expenses. They described Crystal's behavior, waiting outside in an expensive car, taking the money without providing any actual care, appearing impatient and controlling rather than supportive and compassionate. Once the SAR was complete and filed electronically with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Robert called the California Adult Protective Services hotline. He explained the situation to the intake worker, who answered, an elderly widowed man with apparent cognitive decline, systematic large cash withdrawals to a supposed caregiver, signs of financial exploitation, bills going unpaid despite adequate income. We're definitely concerned about Mr. Kim's situation, the APS intake worker said. I'm creating a case file now. An investigator will be assigned within 24 hours and will conduct a home visit within 48 hours. Can you provide the customer's address and contact information? Robert provided Harold's information, then asked, what happens if the person suspected of exploitation is living with the victim and controls access to them? Our investigators are trained to handle that. They have authority to interview the alleged victim privately, without the suspected abuser present.
If the investigator determines there's immediate risk, they can arrange for emergency intervention, relocating the victim to safety, obtaining emergency protective orders, coordinating with law enforcement. The investigation will look at the whole situation: Mr. Kim's cognitive status, his financial situation, the caregiver's role and compensation, whether there's documentation supporting the claimed expenses. We're placing a temporary hold on large withdrawals from his accounts, Robert said. We don't want more money disappearing while you investigate. That's appropriate, and actually very helpful. Often by the time financial exploitation is identified, the victim's resources have been completely drained. Your early intervention could preserve assets that might be recoverable. We'll be in touch as the investigation proceeds. Thank you for reporting this. Bank employees are often the first to notice financial exploitation because you see the money patterns. After hanging up, Robert turned to Linda. You did the right thing bringing this to my attention. I know it's difficult to insert ourselves into customers' financial decisions, but elder abuse is epidemic. Financial exploitation is one of the most common forms, and banks are critical frontline defenders because we see the transactions. I couldn't ignore it, Linda said. I've known Harold for 16 years. He's such a sweet man, so kind and polite. Watching him being manipulated and stolen from by this woman claiming to care for him, it's heartbreaking and infuriating. I just hope we're not too late. You might have saved his life, Robert said seriously. Financial exploitation often accompanies or leads to other forms of abuse, neglect, physical abuse, isolation. And even if the abuse is purely financial, losing one's life savings in old age is devastating. Harold can't replace that money. This could be the difference between him having security and comfort in his final years versus ending up destitute and homeless. Linda returned to her teller station, but she couldn't stop thinking about Harold for the rest of her shift. When she got home to her apartment in the Richmond district that evening, she found herself unable to relax. She kept seeing Harold's confused, anxious face. She kept seeing Crystal's cold, predatory demeanor as she seized the envelope of cash. She'd done her job by reporting, but she wouldn't feel better until she knew Harold was safe. Over the weekend, Linda couldn't stop thinking about the situation. She'd worked in banking long enough to see various forms of financial trouble: people losing jobs, getting divorced, falling into debt, struggling with business failures. But there was something particularly cruel about elder financial abuse. These were people at the most vulnerable stage of life, often cognitively impaired, isolated after losing spouses and friends, trusting because they came from generations that believed in trusting authority and caregivers. Predators specifically targeted these vulnerabilities, befriending lonely elderly people, gaining their confidence, positioning themselves as indispensable helpers, then systematically stealing everything while the victims were too confused or ashamed or controlled to get help. On Monday morning, Linda was back at work when she received a call from Maria Santos, the Adult Protective Services investigator who'd been assigned to Harold's case. Miss Chen, thank you for your report about Harold Kim. I wanted to let you know I've been assigned to investigate, and I'm planning to conduct a home visit today. I wanted to ask a few follow-up questions first. You mentioned you saw the person who's allegedly exploiting him, this woman named Crystal. Yes, I've seen her several times now through the bank windows, when Harold leaves after making withdrawals. Can you describe her in detail? Linda provided a thorough description. Late 20s, Latina, approximately 5'6", slender build, long dark hair, attractive, dressed stylishly in expensive-looking clothing, drove a silver BMW. She doesn't look or act like a professional caregiver. She looks like someone with money, someone who enjoys an upscale lifestyle. And her demeanor toward Harold is wrong. No warmth, no patience, no concern, just this cold, controlling, entitled attitude. That fits what I'm seeing in the financial records your bank provided, Maria said. I'm going to visit Harold's home this afternoon. I'll need to interview both him and this Crystal person. Bank holds are important tools to stop the bleeding, but my investigation will determine whether we need more aggressive intervention, emergency protective orders, criminal referral, relocation to safety. Please help him, Linda said. He's such a vulnerable, sweet man. This woman is destroying him. We'll do everything we can, Maria promised. That afternoon, Maria Santos drove to the address listed for Harold Kim, a modest single-family home on 44th Avenue, one of the hundreds of nearly identical stucco houses built in the Sunset District after World War II, to house returning veterans and their families. The neighborhood was quiet, residential, filled with working-class and middle-class families, mostly Asian American with pockets of Irish American and Latino residents. Harold's house was well maintained on the outside, with a neat small lawn and tidy flower beds, though Maria noted with her trained investigator's eye that the garden showed signs of recent neglect, overgrown weeds, dead flowers that hadn't been removed, mail visible in the mailbox, suggesting it hadn't been collected promptly. Maria knocked on the front door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a young woman matching the description Linda had provided, late 20s, attractive, dressed in yoga pants and a designer athletic top, hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking annoyed at being disturbed. Can I help you? The woman asked, her tone carrying an edge of impatience, rather than genuine helpfulness. I'm Maria Santos from Adult Protective Services. I'm here to conduct a wellness check on Harold Kim. Are you Crystal? The woman's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of alarm quickly masked by practiced friendliness. Yes, I'm Crystal Martinez. I'm Mr. Kim's caregiver. Is there a problem? Has someone made a complaint? Her tone suggested she was already preparing defenses. We received a report of concern about Mr. Kim's welfare, which triggers a mandatory wellness check. I need to see Mr. Kim and speak with him. Is he home? Yes, he's home. He's resting in the living room. But I should warn you, Mr. Kim has dementia. He gets confused easily. Sometimes he says things that don't make sense, or doesn't remember things correctly. I wouldn't put too much stock in whatever he tells you. This preemptive discrediting of the victim's potential statements was a classic tactic used by abusers.
I still need to speak with him, Maria said firmly. May I come in? Crystal stepped aside reluctantly, allowing Maria into the house. The interior was clean, but showed the same signs of mild neglect as the exterior. Dust on surfaces, dishes in the sink, newspapers and mail piled on tables. It was the home of someone who'd once taken meticulous care of their living space, but could no longer maintain it properly, and whose caregiver wasn't maintaining it either. Crystal called toward the living room. "Harold, there's someone here from social services to see you. Some kind of routine checkup." Harold appeared from the living room, moving slowly, looking confused and somewhat apprehensive. He was wearing sweatpants and a cardigan, comfortable clothing, but a far cry from the pressed slacks and button-down shirts he'd worn every single time Linda had seen him at the bank. His hair, which had always been neatly combed, was disheveled. He had the appearance of someone who'd stopped taking care of himself, or who no longer had someone helping him maintain his dignity. "Mr. Kim, I'm Maria Santos from Adult Protective Services. I'm here to make sure you're okay and that you're receiving proper care. Is there somewhere we can sit down and talk?" Harold looked uncertain, glancing at Crystal as if seeking permission or guidance. Crystal smiled tightly. "Of course, why don't you use the dining room? I'll be right here in the kitchen if Harold needs me." "Actually, I need to speak with Mr. Kim privately," Maria said. "That's standard protocol for wellness checks." Crystal's friendly mask slipped slightly. "I don't think that's appropriate. Harold gets confused and anxious without me present. His doctor has recommended I stay with him during stressful situations to help keep him calm and oriented, and he might not understand your questions properly without me there to clarify." "I understand your concern, but I'm required to interview Mr. Kim alone," Maria said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "If he becomes distressed, I can certainly ask you to join us, but I need to start with a private conversation." Crystal looked like she wanted to argue further, but realized pushing back too hard would look suspicious. "Fine, but I'm right here if he needs me." She positioned herself at the kitchen counter, supposedly focused on her phone, but close enough that she might overhear conversation from the dining room depending on how loudly they spoke. Maria gestured for Harold to follow her into the dining room. Once there, she spoke quietly, mindful of Crystal's proximity. "Mr. Kim, I'm here because your bank expressed concerns about your financial situation. They've noticed some patterns that worry them. I want to make sure you're safe and that you're not being taken advantage of. Can you tell me about your relationship with Crystal?" Harold's expression was confused, almost fearful. He kept glancing toward the kitchen where Crystal was positioned. "Crystal, she's my caregiver. After my wife Sunja died last year, I couldn't manage everything by myself. Shopping, cooking, cleaning, paying bills. It was all too much. Crystal came from a home health agency at first, just to help a few hours a week, but she was so kind and helpful that I asked her to come full-time. She takes care of everything now. How do you pay Crystal for her work?" I give her money, cash. She says it's easier that way, for paying household expenses and her wages. She handles all the bills and shopping and everything. I don't have to worry about anything. Do you know how much money you've given Crystal over the past year?" Harold looked confused and distressed by the question. I'm not sure. I give her $8,000 every week. Crystal says that's what she needs to cover everything. The household expenses, her salary, my care needs. $8,000 every week, Maria repeated, making sure she'd heard correctly. "That's over $400,000 a year, Mr. Kim. Does that seem like a reasonable amount for household expenses and caregiver wages?" Harold looked even more confused and upset. I don't know. Crystal says that's what's needed. She shows me bills and receipts sometimes. I don't understand all the details anymore. My mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. Crystal says I forget things, that I get confused about money, that it's better if she handles everything. Maria noted Harold's cognitive impairment. He was clearly having difficulty following the conversation, tracking details, understanding the implications of what he was saying. This vulnerability made him an ideal target for exploitation. "Mr. Kim, your bank says some of your bills haven't been paid. Your mortgage has been late. Utility bills have gone unpaid. If Crystal is using your money to pay expenses, why aren't those bills being paid?" "They haven't." Harold looked distressed. "Crystal said everything was paid. She must have forgotten some things. Or maybe the company's made mistakes. I should ask her about it. Do you have any family, Mr. Kim? Children, siblings, other relatives who help look after you?" "My wife and I never had children. My younger brother lives in Seoul. We talk on the phone sometimes, but not often. I have some cousins in Los Angeles, but we're not close. After Sunja died, I was very alone. Crystal has been wonderful. I don't know what I'd do without her." This isolation was another classic element of elder exploitation. Abusers deliberately isolated victims from family and friends, making the victim completely dependent on the abuser, removing any outside oversight or support that might recognize the abuse. "Mr. Kim, has Crystal ever prevented you from seeing family or friends? Has she discouraged you from talking to other people about your finances or your situation?" No, nothing like that," Harold said quickly, though his eyes told a different story. "Crystal just says I should rest, that visitors tire me out, that I should focus on my health. She's protective of me. Do you feel safe here? Does Crystal ever threaten you or make you feel afraid?" "No, Crystal has never hurt me. She takes good care of me. Sometimes she gets frustrated when I forget things or move too slowly, but she's never violent. I'm grateful for her help." Maria asked more questions, assessing Harold's cognitive function, his understanding of his financial situation, his ability to make informed decisions. It became clear that Harold had moderate cognitive impairment, not severe dementia, but enough decline that he struggled with complex financial concepts, was easily confused, had difficulty remembering recent events, and was vulnerable to manipulation. After about 30 minutes with Harold, Maria asked to speak with Crystal. Crystal came into the dining room, her expression a mixture of concern and defensiveness. "How is Harold? I told you he gets confused easily. You can't take everything he says at face value. Miss Martinez, I have some questions about your caregiving arrangement with Mr. Kim. How long have you been working for him?" "About a year. I started shortly after his wife died. He was so lost and lonely. I helped him adjust to living alone." "What agency did you work for initially?" A brief hesitation. "Bay Area Home Health. But I left the agency after a few months because Harold wanted me to work for him directly, full-time. He prefers having consistent care from someone he knows, rather than different people from an agency." "And what is your salary arrangement?" "Harold is very generous. He pays me well because I provide comprehensive care. I'm here basically 24/7. I live here to make sure he's safe. I handle all the cooking, cleaning, shopping, medications, appointments, bills, everything. It's a demanding job. How much does Harold pay you?" Crystal's eyes flashed with irritation at the direct question. "That's between me and Harold. He's satisfied with our arrangement. He's never complained about my wages. Mr. Kim told me he gives you $8,000 in cash every week. That's over $400,000 per year," Maria said, watching Crystal's reaction carefully. "That seems extraordinarily high for a caregiver position, even for full-time live-in care. The typical salary for a live-in caregiver in San Francisco is between $50,000 and $70,000 per year, including room and board. Can you explain why you're receiving 6 times the normal rate?" Crystal's friendly demeanor was rapidly evaporating, replaced by cold defensiveness. "I provide exceptional care. Harold values my work. He's wealthy and can afford to be generous. I don't see how this is anyone's business but ours. Harold is a competent adult who can spend his money however he chooses. Can you provide documentation showing how you're spending the money Mr. Kim gives you? Receipts for household expenses, records of bill payments, accounting of how the funds are used." "I don't owe you an accounting of anything," Crystal said, her voice hardening. "Harold trusts me to manage things. He doesn't want to be bothered with paperwork and receipts. That's the whole point of having me handle his affairs, so he doesn't have to stress about details." "Mr. Martinez, Mr. Kim's mortgage payments have been late, utility bills have gone unpaid, medical bills are in collections, yet he's giving you $8,000 every week. Where is that money going if not to his legitimate expenses? Those bills must have been misplaced or overlooked. I'll take care of them. Managing everything for an elderly person is complicated. Sometimes things slip through the cracks. Do you have power of attorney over Mr. Kim's finances? Crystal hesitated again. Just a fraction of a second too long. Harold signed papers giving me authority to handle his accounts and bills. It made things simpler. When did he sign those papers? A few months ago. He was having trouble keeping track of everything and asked me to take over fully. Maria made detailed notes. Power of attorney documents signed by a cognitively impaired person, potentially under undue influence or without full understanding, would be legally questionable. If Crystal had manipulated Harold into signing those documents, that could constitute elder fraud. Miss Martinez, I have to tell you that this situation raises serious concerns about potential financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Mr. Kim is receiving approximately $8,000 per month in income, yet he's giving you $8,000 per week, 4 times his monthly income. His savings have been depleted by over $160,000 in the past year. Bills are going unpaid. This pattern is consistent with financial elder abuse. Crystal's expression turned cold and hostile. I haven't abused anyone. Harold is happy with our arrangement. He'll tell you himself that I provide excellent care and that he's grateful for my help. This is harassment. If you continue, I'll contact my lawyer. You're certainly entitled to legal representation, Maria said calmly, but I'm going to continue investigating this matter. I'll need to review financial records, speak with Mr. Kim's doctors, possibly interview other people who know him. If you have documentation supporting your claim that you're spending his money appropriately on his care and expenses, I'd encourage you to provide it. I don't have to provide anything without a court order, Crystal snapped. Now I think you should leave. You're upsetting Harold with all these questions and accusations. I'll be leaving, but this investigation is just beginning, Maria said. She handed Crystal her business card. If you want to cooperate and provide documentation, that would help. Otherwise, we'll obtain records through other means. Maria left the house but sat in her car for several minutes, making detailed notes while the visit was fresh in her mind. Then she called Detective Michael Torres of the San Francisco Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Torres, this is Maria Santos from Adult Protective Services. I'm calling about a case I think needs criminal investigation. I just completed a wellness check on an 82-year-old man who I believe is being systematically financially exploited by his caregiver. Tell me about it, Torres said. Maria laid out the situation. Harold Kim, the weekly $8,000 cash withdrawals, the depleted savings, the unpaid bills, the caregiver Crystal Martinez who was living an upscale lifestyle far beyond legitimate caregiver wages, the cognitive impairment, making Harold vulnerable, the suspicious power of attorney documents. I've been doing this work for 12 years, Maria said. I've seen dozens of financial exploitation cases. This one has all the classic markers: isolated vulnerable elder, recent widow, cognitive decline, predatory caregiver who gained control of finances, systematic draining of assets, bills going unpaid while caregiver lives lavishly, resistance to oversight or documentation. Sounds like we need to open a criminal investigation, Torres agreed. Can you send me everything you have so far? Bank records, your interview notes, contact information for the bank employees who reported this. I'll get everything to you by end of day, Maria promised. Detective Michael Torres had been with the SFPD for 22 years, the last 15 in the Financial Crimes Unit, specializing in fraud, embezzlement, and financial elder abuse. At 47 years old, Torres had worked hundreds of financial crimes cases, but elder abuse cases were the ones that affected him most deeply. These were vulnerable people being victimized at the most fragile stage of their lives, often by people they trusted, family members, caregivers, friends. The betrayal was profound, and the impact devastating. Torres had seen the full spectrum of elder financial abuse, from family members stealing inheritance, to romance scammers, bilking lonely widows, to predatory caregivers, systematically draining bank accounts. Each case was heartbreaking in its own way, but the caregiver exploitation cases were particularly cruel, because the victims were often so confused and dependent that they couldn't recognize or admit the abuse, even when it was obvious to everyone else. When Torres received Maria's case file that afternoon, he immediately began running background checks on Crystal Martinez. What came back made his jaw tighten with anger. Crystal Martinez had a history. She'd worked for 3 different licensed home health agencies over the past 6 years: Bay Area Home Health, Golden State Care Services, and Compassionate Hearts Home Care. She'd been fired from 2 of those agencies for inappropriate conduct and boundary violations with clients. Torres called Bay Area Home Health and spoke with the HR director, explaining he was investigating a financial exploitation case involving one of their former employees, Crystal Martinez.
Yes, I remember her, the HR director said with audible distaste. We hired her about 6 years ago. She had the required CNA certification, good references from previous non-healthcare jobs, seemed professional in her interview. But we started getting concerning reports from supervisors about 3 months into her employment. What kind of concerns? Crystal was observed taking money from a client's wallet. When confronted, she claimed the client had given it to her as a tip. We couldn't prove otherwise, but it raised red flags. Then another client reported that Crystal had asked to borrow money for rent, claiming she was in financial distress. That's a clear boundary violation. Employees should never ask clients for money or loans. We terminated her employment for violating professional conduct standards. Did you report these incidents to any regulatory agencies? We documented everything in her personnel file, but we didn't report to licensing boards because we didn't have definitive proof of theft, just concerning behavior. In hindsight, maybe we should have. Torres thanked the HR director and moved on to Golden State Care Services. Similar story. Crystal had worked there for about 18 months, was terminated after a client's family complained that Crystal was too friendly with their father and seemed to be isolating him from family visits. The agency's investigation found that Crystal had encouraged the elderly man to give her gifts and had tried to get him to change his will to include her as a beneficiary. We fired her immediately when we discovered she was attempting to get herself written into a client's will. The supervisor told Torres, "That's exploitation, plain and simple." She tried to claim the client wanted to include her because she'd been such good care, and he viewed her as family, but family members said their father had never mentioned Crystal before she started suggesting the will change. Did you report this to law enforcement or licensing authorities? We reported to the California Department of Social Services, which licenses home health agencies and can sanction individual caregivers, but I don't know if they took any action. The family chose not to press charges because their father was already so confused and they didn't want to put him through the stress of testifying. Torres moved on to checking Crystal's personal background. She'd never been convicted of any crimes, but Torres found 2 civil lawsuits filed against her by families of elderly people she'd cared for. Both suits alleged financial exploitation, that Crystal had manipulated elderly clients into giving her large sums of money inappropriately. One case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The attorney for the plaintiff's family told Torres, "We settled because the family wanted it over with, and Crystal didn't have significant assets to recover, even if we'd won in court. But there's no question in my mind that she financially exploited our client. Mr. Henderson was 90 years old with dementia when Crystal became his caregiver. Within 6 months, she'd gotten him to loan her $35,000 that she never repaid, plus she was charging him $2,000 a week for care that should have cost $500. When the family discovered what was happening and confronted her, she quit and disappeared. We tried to pursue criminal charges, but the DA's office said they didn't have enough evidence for prosecution. The other lawsuit had been dismissed because the victim, an 87-year-old woman, died before trial, and without her testimony, the case couldn't proceed. But the allegations were strikingly similar to Harold's situation: excessive payments for care, depleted savings, unpaid bills, caregiver living lavishly while claiming poverty. Crystal Martinez is a serial predator, Torres muttered to himself as he compiled the evidence. She finds vulnerable elderly people, usually recent widows or widowers, establishes herself as their caregiver, gains their trust, isolates them from family, gets control of their finances, and systematically drains their accounts. She's done this multiple times. Torres also ran financial checks on Crystal. Despite claiming to be a modestly paid caregiver, Crystal was living a lifestyle that didn't match that income level. She'd purchased the silver BMW 8 months ago, a $62,000 vehicle. She lived in a luxury apartment in the Marina District with rent of $3,200 per month. Her credit card statements, which Torres accessed through a court order, showed expensive clothing purchases, high-end restaurants, weekend trips to Las Vegas and Los Angeles, spa treatments, designer handbags. Over the past year, Crystal had spent approximately $180,000, far more than any legitimate caregiver salary could support. But where was the rest of Harold's money? Torres calculated that if Harold had been giving Crystal approximately $416,000 per year, $8,000, 52 weeks, and Crystal had only spent about $180,000 of it on her lifestyle, what happened to the other $236,000? Torres dug deeper into Crystal's financial records and found the answer. She'd been systematically transferring money to accounts in Mexico. Over the past year, Crystal had sent approximately $220,000 in wire transfers to a bank in Guadalajara, Mexico. Torres couldn't access those Mexican accounts directly, but the pattern suggested Crystal was moving stolen money offshore, where it would be harder for victims to recover. This made Crystal's crimes even more calculated and premeditated. She wasn't just impulsively stealing money to fund an extravagant lifestyle. She was systematically moving assets offshore, presumably planning for the day when she'd be caught and would flee the country with her stolen wealth. Torres compiled all this evidence and presented it to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Park reviewed the case file and agreed they had sufficient evidence for criminal charges. This is elder financial abuse. Clearly, Park said, Crystal Martinez systematically exploited Harold Kim's vulnerability for financial gain. We have bank records showing the money flow. We have documentation of her lavish lifestyle funded by Harold's money. We have her history of similar conduct with other elderly victims. We can charge her with elder financial abuse, theft from a dependent adult, fraud, and possibly identity theft if she was signing documents in Harold's name without proper authorization. What about the power of attorney she got Harold to sign? Torres asked. If Harold was already cognitively impaired when he signed those documents, and if Crystal used undue influence to get him to sign without him understanding what he was signing, that could be fraud or forgery. We'll need a cognitive assessment of Harold's mental state and medical records showing when his cognitive decline began. Torres obtained a court order for Harold's medical records from his primary care physician, Dr. Susan Park. The records showed that Dr. Park had documented concerns about Harold's cognitive function for over a year since shortly after his wife's death. Notes from appointments over the past 18 months showed progressive decline. Patient demonstrates short-term memory problems, difficulty following complex instructions, seems confused about recent events, suspect mild cognitive impairment, possibly early-stage dementia, referred for neurological evaluation. Patient's cognitive function has declined since last visit. MSE score 2230, down from 2630 6 months ago. Patient's caregiver reports he frequently forgets conversations, gets lost in familiar places, has difficulty managing medications. Recommend further cognitive assessment. Patient seems more confused today, unable to recall current medications or recent medical history. Caregiver Crystal present and answering most questions. Patient appears dependent on caregiver for information. The medical records confirmed that Harold had been experiencing significant cognitive impairment for over a year, the entire time Crystal had been working for him and gaining control of his finances. This supported the argument that Harold had not been mentally competent to make informed decisions about giving Crystal power of attorney or making the massive financial gifts she'd been taking. With this evidence compiled, Torres prepared to arrest Crystal Martinez. But there was a complication. As soon as Harold's bank had placed the hold on large withdrawals, Crystal had become aware that her scheme was being investigated. Torres worried that Crystal might flee, especially given that she'd been moving money to Mexico. Torres assigned surveillance on Crystal's apartment and Harold's home. Detectives watched to see if Crystal showed signs of preparing to flee, packing bags, making unusual purchases, acting nervous or suspicious. For several days, Crystal maintained her normal routine, continuing to stay at Harold's home, driving her BMW around the city, seemingly unconcerned about the investigation. But on the fourth day of surveillance, detectives observed Crystal loading suitcases into her BMW and making multiple phone calls that appeared agitated. She seemed to be preparing to leave. Torres decided they couldn't wait any longer. On a Thursday morning, he arrived at Harold's home with 2 uniformed officers and a warrant for Crystal's arrest. Crystal answered the door, her expression immediately wary when she saw the police. "What do you want?" "Crystal Martinez, I'm Detective Torres, SFPD Financial Crimes. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of elder financial abuse, theft from a dependent adult, fraud and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." As Torres read Crystal her Miranda rights, her facade of friendly innocence completely shattered. "This is insane. I haven't done anything wrong. Harold gave me that money voluntarily. He's happy with our arrangement. You can't arrest me for being paid for my work. Ma'am, you can explain your side at the station. Right now you're under arrest. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." As officers handcuffed Crystal, Harold appeared from the living room, looking confused and distressed. "What's happening? Why are you arresting Crystal? She takes care of me. I need her." "Mr. Kim, Crystal has been stealing from you," Torres explained gently. "She's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars that should have been used for your care and expenses. We're here to protect you." No, Crystal wouldn't steal from me," Harold said, his confusion evident. "She's been helping me. This is a mistake." This reaction was typical of exploitation victims. They often defended their abusers, unable or unwilling to recognize the abuse even when confronted with clear evidence. The psychological manipulation and dependency that abusers created made victims loyal even to their own detriment. As Crystal was taken to the patrol car, she shouted back at Harold, "Don't say anything to them without a lawyer. Don't let them trick you. I'll be back soon and we'll sort this out." But Crystal wouldn't be back soon. She was taken to the county jail, booked on multiple felony charges, and held on $500,000 bail, an amount deliberately set high to ensure she couldn't easily post bail and flee. With Crystal arrested and out of Harold's home, Adult Protective Services moved quickly to ensure Harold had proper care and protection. Maria Santos returned to Harold's home that afternoon with a licensed social worker from a reputable agency, Margaret Chen. Margaret was a 62-year-old woman who'd been a professional caregiver for 30 years, with specialized training in dementia care. Unlike Crystal, who'd been a predator masquerading as a caregiver, Margaret was the real thing, patient, compassionate, properly trained, and operating with full oversight and documentation.
"Mr. Kim, I'm Margaret," she introduced herself warmly. "I'm here to help you with daily activities and to make sure you're taken care of properly. I'll be cooking meals, helping with housekeeping, taking you to appointments, and managing your medications. I work for Golden Years Home Care Agency, and they supervise my work to make sure everything is done correctly." Harold was resistant at first, still insisting he needed Crystal and that this was all a misunderstanding. But Margaret's genuine kindness and patience gradually won him over. She prepared him a proper meal, something Harold admitted he hadn't had in weeks, as Crystal usually just gave him frozen dinners or takeout. She helped him sort through the piles of mail and unpaid bills. She organized his medications, which had been chaotically jumbled, in a drawer. She treated Harold with the dignity and respect that Crystal had never shown. Maria Santos also helped Harold's distant family reconnect with him. Harold had mentioned cousins in Los Angeles, Jennifer Kim Lee and her brother David Kim. Maria tracked them down and called Jennifer to explain the situation.
"Uncle Harold," Jennifer said, shocked. "We've been worried about him since Aunt Sunja died, but we haven't been able to reach him. We'd call and sometimes this woman Crystal would answer and say he was sleeping or not feeling well. A few times when we did talk to Uncle Harold, he seemed confused and would cut the conversation short. We live 400 miles away and both have jobs and kids, so we couldn't just drop everything to visit constantly, but we were concerned. Your uncle has been financially exploited by his caregiver," Maria explained. "She's been arrested, but he needs family support. His cognitive function has declined, and he's vulnerable. Would you be able to come to San Francisco to help get his affairs in order?" "Absolutely. I'll drive up this weekend." "Oh my God, poor Uncle Harold. He must have been so lonely and confused after Aunt Sunja died. Someone took advantage of that. That's despicable." When Jennifer arrived that Saturday, she was shocked by what she found. Harold's house, once immaculate, was dirty and neglected. Harold himself looked unkempt and had lost significant weight. His financial records showed devastation, savings depleted, bills unpaid, collection notices piling up. "Uncle Harold, I'm so sorry we weren't here for you," Jennifer said, hugging her elderly uncle. "We should have been more present after Aunt Sunja died. We let you down. I thought Crystal was helping me," Harold said, still confused about what had happened. "She said she was taking care of everything. Did she really steal from me?" Jennifer and Maria sat with Harold and gently walked him through the bank statements, showing him the systematic withdrawals, the depleted accounts, the unpaid bills. Gradually, Harold began to understand that Crystal hadn't been helping him. She'd been robbing him. "She seemed so nice," Harold said sadly. "After Sunja died, I was so alone. Crystal paid attention to me, made me feel cared for. I trusted her completely. How could she do this to me?" "Predators are good at seeming nice," Maria explained. "They target vulnerable people specifically because those people need help and are willing to trust. It's not your fault, Mr. Kim. Crystal is a professional criminal who's done this before. You couldn't have known." Over the following weeks, Jennifer helped Harold begin rebuilding his life. She worked with an elder law attorney to review Harold's finances and legal situation. The attorney determined that the power of attorney documents Crystal had gotten Harold to sign were likely invalid because Harold had been cognitively impaired when he signed them and hadn't understood what he was signing. Those documents were revoked. Jennifer helped Harold catch up on his overdue bills, negotiating with creditors to waive late fees given the circumstances. She set up a new financial management system with oversight. Harold's bills would be paid automatically from his accounts, and Jennifer would receive copies of all statements to monitor for any irregularities. Harold's depleted savings were devastating, over $160,000 gone, money Harold had saved over decades of hard work and careful planning. That money couldn't be quickly replaced. Harold's monthly income of $8,000 would cover his expenses going forward, but rebuilding savings at age 82 wasn't realistic. The criminal case against Crystal moved through the court system. She was arraigned on multiple felony charges, pleaded not guilty, and her attorney tried to argue that Harold had voluntarily given her the money as compensation for exceptional care. Mr. Kim paid Ms. Martinez generously because she provided 24-hour care, managed his entire household, and became like family to him. Crystal's public defender argued at a bail hearing. Elderly people often give financial gifts to caregivers they appreciate. That's not a crime, but prosecutor Jennifer Park demolished that defense. The defendant wasn't providing care worth $416,000 per year. She was providing minimal care while stealing systematically. Mr. Kim's bills went unpaid. His health deteriorated. His home was neglected, all while the defendant lived lavishly on his money and sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to offshore accounts. This isn't generous compensation, it's systematic theft from a vulnerable elderly man who was cognitively impaired and unable to recognize he was being exploited. The judge denied bail reduction, keeping Crystal in custody pending trial. The defendant has shown a pattern of predatory behavior against elderly victims, has moved substantial assets offshore suggesting flight risk, and the charges are serious. Bail remains at $500,000. 3 months after her arrest, facing overwhelming evidence, Crystal finally accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to elder financial abuse, theft from a dependent adult, and fraud. In exchange for the plea, the prosecution agreed to recommend a sentence of 12 years in state prison rather than the maximum of 20 years she could have received if convicted at trial. At the sentencing hearing, Harold provided a victim impact statement. Jennifer had helped him prepare it, writing down his thoughts because Harold's cognitive impairment made it difficult for him to organize his ideas coherently. Jennifer read the statement on Harold's behalf. "My name is Harold Kim. I'm 82 years old. I came to America in 1967 with nothing but a degree and determination to build a good life. I worked hard for 50 years. I saved carefully. My wife Sunjar and I built a modest but comfortable life together. When Sunjar died last year, I was devastated and lost. I needed help. Crystal Martinez came into my life claiming to be a caregiver. She seemed kind and helpful. I trusted her. I gave her control of my finances because I thought she was helping me. Instead, she was stealing from me. She took over $370,000, my life savings, money Sunjar and I had accumulated over decades. Because Crystal was stealing my money instead of paying my bills, my mortgage went into arrears. My utilities were almost shut off. Medical bills went to collections. Meanwhile, Crystal was driving an expensive car, taking vacations, living in a luxury apartment, all funded by my money, while she let me eat frozen dinners and live in a declining home. I'm 82 years old. I can't work anymore. I can't rebuild my savings. Crystal stole my financial security. She stole the legacy I hoped to leave to my family. She stole my dignity and my peace of mind in my final years. But worse than the money, Crystal stole my ability to trust. I'm afraid now of anyone who offers to help me. I question everyone's motives. I feel ashamed that I was so easily fooled. That shame hurts more than the financial loss. I ask the court to sentence Crystal Martinez to the maximum allowed by law, not only for what she did to me, but to protect other elderly people from becoming her next victims. She's a predator who targets the most vulnerable. She needs to be stopped. Crystal was given an opportunity to speak before sentencing. She showed no remorse, maintaining her innocence even after pleading guilty. I provided good care to Mr. Kim. He was generous in compensating me. I don't believe I did anything wrong, but I accepted this plea to avoid a lengthy trial. I'm sorry if Mr. Kim feels I took advantage of him, but that wasn't my intention. Judge Patricia Morrison wasn't swayed by Crystal's performance. Miss Martinez, you are a predator who deliberately targeted a vulnerable elderly man suffering from cognitive decline and grief. You isolated him, manipulated him, and systematically stole his life savings while providing minimal care. The evidence shows you've done this before to other elderly victims. Mr. Kim saved for 50 years to accumulate the money you stole in 12 months. He's 82 years old and can never rebuild what you took. You've devastated his financial security in his final years. You've destroyed his ability to trust. You've shown no genuine remorse. Under the plea agreement, I'm sentencing you to 12 years in state prison. Additionally, you're ordered to pay restitution of $370,000 to Harold Kim, though given your spending patterns, I have little expectation you'll ever pay more than a fraction of that amount. You are permanently banned from ever working as a caregiver in California or any other state, and upon release from prison, you'll be on supervised probation for 5 years with strict conditions prohibiting you from any contact with elderly people in professional or personal contexts. Crystal was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, beginning a 12-year prison sentence. Harold, sitting in the gallery with Jennifer, showed little emotion. The sentencing couldn't undo the damage Crystal had done, couldn't restore his stolen savings, couldn't give him back the trust and security she'd destroyed. Over the following months, Harold's life gradually stabilized with Margaret's proper care and Jennifer's oversight. His cognitive function didn't improve. Dementia doesn't reverse, but it stopped declining as rapidly as it had under Crystal's neglectful care. With proper nutrition, medication management, and genuine care, Harold's quality of life improved significantly. Harold lived 2 more years after Crystal's conviction, passing away peacefully at age 84 in 2027. He left what remained of his estate, about $90,000 plus his paid-off house, to Jennifer and David, with a note thanking them for helping him in his time of need. It wasn't the substantial inheritance Harold had once hoped to leave, but Jennifer and David weren't upset about the reduced inheritance. They were just grateful they'd been able to help their uncle get proper care in his final years and see his abuser face justice. Linda Chen, the bank teller whose vigilance had initiated the investigation, attended Harold's funeral. She'd continued to see Harold occasionally when he came to the bank with Margaret, and she'd testified at Crystal's trial about the suspicious withdrawal pattern she'd noticed. Mr. Kim was such a sweet man, Linda told Jennifer at the funeral. I'm just glad we were able to help him before Crystal took everything. I wish I'd noticed sooner. Maybe I could have saved more of his money. You saved what mattered most, his dignity and his last years, Jennifer said. Crystal was arrested and punished. Uncle Harold got proper care. He knew his family loved him, and that justice had been done. That's because you paid attention and reported your concerns. Thank you for caring enough to act. 5 years after Linda first noticed Harold's troubling withdrawal pattern, Wells Fargo used the case as a central example in their ongoing training for employees about recognizing and reporting elder financial abuse. Linda, now 49 and promoted to assistant branch manager, frequently trained new employees using Harold's story. I'd worked at this bank for 16 years, processed probably hundreds of thousands of transactions. Most of the time, customers' financial decisions are none of our business. It's their money, and they can do what they want with it. But when I saw Harold Kim withdrawing his entire monthly income in cash every single week for 3 months, when I saw bills going unpaid despite those massive withdrawals, when I watched through the window as a young woman who showed no caregiving behaviors took the money from him with cold entitlement, I knew something was wrong. Harold had been banking with us for 40 years. I'd known him for 16 years. I knew his normal patterns, and this wasn't normal. This was exploitation. That phone call to my manager, that decision to report my concerns rather than ignoring them, that saved what was left of Harold's life savings. It got him the protection and proper care he needed. It put a predator in prison and potentially prevented her from victimizing other elderly people. I tell you this story because one day you'll probably see something similar, an elderly customer making unusual withdrawals, bills going unpaid despite adequate income, a sudden new person controlling an elderly customer's finances, confusion or fear when you ask questions. When you see those red flags, speak up, file a report, call Adult Protective Services. Don't assume someone else will notice or that it's not your business. Bank employees are often the only people who see vulnerable elderly customers regularly and have visibility into financial patterns. We're uniquely positioned to recognize exploitation. With that position comes responsibility. Harold Kim deserved better than what Crystal Martinez did to him. Every elderly customer deserves to have their hard-earned savings protected. Every vulnerable person deserves to have someone notice when they're being exploited and act on that concern. Pay attention. Care enough to act. That's all it takes to save someone. Linda's training based on Harold's real case helped Wells Fargo employees identify and report numerous subsequent cases of potential elder financial abuse. Over the 5 years following Harold's case, Wells Fargo employees at Linda's branch alone identified and reported 14 additional suspected exploitation cases, resulting in investigations that helped protect vulnerable customers. The ripple effects of Linda's initial observation continued spreading. Harold's case was written up in professional journals for bankers and elder care professionals. It was cited in legislative hearings about strengthening elder financial abuse protections. It influenced California's passage of enhanced laws allowing banks to delay or refuse suspicious transactions involving vulnerable adults. Maria Santos, the APS investigator, used Harold's case in training sessions for social workers, teaching them to recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation and how to build strong cases for intervention. Detective Torres used the case in training for financial crimes detectives, emphasizing the importance of coordinating with banks, APS, and family members to build comprehensive evidence. 10 years after Linda Chen noticed Harold Kim's troubling withdrawal pattern, the case remained a touchstone for discussions about elder financial abuse and the critical role of professional vigilance in protecting vulnerable people. At a conference on elder financial abuse prevention, Linda was invited to speak about her experience. Now 54 years old and a regional manager overseeing multiple Wells Fargo branches, Linda had made elder financial protection a signature focus of her management approach. 10 years ago, I was a bank teller who noticed an 82-year-old regular customer withdrawing $8,000 in cash every Friday for 3 months straight, Linda told the conference attendees. That observation, that recognition, that a long-time customer's financial behavior had changed dramatically, led to exposing a predator who'd stolen over $370,000 from a vulnerable elderly man.
Harold Kim passed away years ago, but the lessons from his case endure. Financial elder abuse is epidemic. 1 in 10 elderly Americans experiences some form of financial exploitation, resulting in over $36 billion stolen from seniors annually. Most cases are never reported because victims don't recognize the abuse, are too ashamed to disclose it, or are too controlled by the abuser to seek help. Bank employees are uniquely positioned to notice exploitation because we see the money moving. We see patterns across time that reveal systematic theft. We see vulnerable customers who might not have anyone else watching out for them. But noticing isn't enough. We must act on what we notice. Filing that report, making that call to Adult Protective Services, placing that hold on suspicious transactions. Those actions save lives and protect vulnerable people who can't protect themselves. Harold Kim worked hard his entire life to save $240,000. A predator stole most of it in 12 months. Harold died with only $90,000 left. His legacy diminished, his final years marked by betrayal. But because bank employees noticed and reported, he got proper care in his last years. He saw his abuser face justice. He was reunited with family. He died knowing people had cared enough to help him. That's the power of professional vigilance. That's the responsibility we carry in positions where we have visibility into vulnerable people's lives. That's why I'm standing here today, 10 years later, still telling Harold's story, because every person in this room will encounter potential elder abuse at some point. When that moment comes, I hope you'll remember Harold Kim. I hope you'll remember that your observation, your report, your action could save someone. That's all it takes, paying attention and caring enough to act.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.